Good evening, fellow Americans, and thank you for listening to your home this evening. We will be discussing the energy crisis of 1973. First, let us turn back the clock just a little bit. In the year 1948, following the end of World War II, Israel was established by the Allied powers as a refuge for disenfranchised Jewish people.
However, the Arab population refused to acknowledge the validity of the Israeli state. This tension erupted into full-scale conflicts. One such conflict was the Yom Kippur War of 1973. In this conflict, Egypt and Syria, wanting to gain back land they lost to the Israeli state, launched an armed attack on Israel. Nixon, knowing that Russia would intervene on behalf of the Syrians and Egyptians, wanted to aid Israel. He launched Operation Nickelgrass to airlift weapons to the Israelis. In response to this, members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, countries like Syria and Egypt, imposed an embargo of oil to the U.S.
At this point, the U.S. was heavily dependent on foreign oil. From the end of World War II to the year 1970, the U.S. had more than tripled its oil consumption. At the same time, the number of cars on the road had increased by over 250%.
What did this mean for the U.S.? To find out, we went to a primary source, someone who's been alive for a long time.
I was a teenager back in the 70s. There were two oil embargoes. There was one in 73, one in 79. These oil embargoes were serious problems for America. About 30 to 40% of our oil was from OPEC. And OPEC did not like the U.S. interactions in the Yom Kippur or helping Israel in the Yom Kippur War, so they said, we're going to cut back on the oil. I was a teenager at that time. I wasn't driving, but I do recall the long lines. There was very, very little gas. In fact, there was a lot of what we call gas siphoning. People would go into gas tanks of other cars and siphon it out. Some really stupid people went to Winnebagos and didn't siphon out the gas, they siphoned out the septic. Yes, really stupid people. That's also the reason why now gas tanks have locks on them, so that nobody siphons anymore. But we don't have the embargoes. What were the lines like? Well, my father used to wait in line at one particular gas station that had the gas. Some days you had no way of getting gas because your license plate was an odd number. That would be the even number days. Odd days you'd have a license plate that was odd number, and that was your time to go. My father enjoyed this one gas station because they served coffee. He had no problem sitting there waiting in line as long as he had the coffee. You knew which gas station was available based on a flag that was out. If it was green, they had gas. If it was yellow, they're running short. If it was red, they had nothing. In 1973, that was such a terrible time that America finally said, we're going to do something about it. And they had one of the biggest government projects that went for 4 years, employed lots and lots of people. It was the Alaskan pipeline, over 700 miles. And since then, there's been a lot of drilling and all. And now America has, with fracking, by another 4 years, will be the largest oil producer and exporter in the world.
Thanks, Dr. Vilhauer.
In some states, the price of gas rose from $3 a barrel to $12.
In addition to high prices, the oil shortage fueled long lines at gas stations all across the country.
Local, state, and federal governments called for measures to conserve energy, discouraging gas stations from opening on Sundays and discouraging homeowners from putting up Christmas lights or using an excessive amount of heat. This led to many chilly Americans.
However, this oil crisis did not only have an impact on the average American.
The American car industry as a whole suffered as a result of this oil crisis. The American car manufacturers were attempting to make bigger and better cars. However, in this crisis, they were quickly beat out by foreign brands such as Toyota and Volkswagen, who were able to create sleeker and more fuel-efficient cars as compared to the American gas guzzlers. In the year 1972, foreign cars only accounted for 13% of the American car industry. However, by the year 1975, they accounted for a then record of 15.8%.
The embargo was lifted in 1974, but effects of it persisted. For example, the environmentalist movement gained a lot of traction in response to this embargo. Once people realized how dependent we were not only on foreign oil, but on oil as a whole, they wanted to do something about it. The Department of Energy was founded for this reason.
Check out this PSA from the Department of Energy in the 1970s.
Some say that if we can put a man on the moon, we can do anything. But can we solve our energy problem in time? Nearly half of our oil is now imported. Much is wasted. We are exhausting our irreplaceable energy resources. Do we have time? Think about it.
All in all, the embargo lasted 5 months, but the U.S. was shaken. One effect of the energy crisis was that, seeking a solution to the dependence of foreign oil they were so suddenly aware of, officials in Washington commissioned the Alaskan Pipeline to be built in 1975. This was an 800-mile-long pipeline meant to transport oil from the largest oil reserve in the U.S., under Prudhoe Bay, to be sold to Americans or exported. The U.S. also began to invest more time and money in coal and nuclear power.
Although these efforts lost traction in the mid-1980s as prices returned to normal, the impacts of environmentalism still exist today. However, what still remains is our nation's dependence on foreign oil and foreign cars. Thank you, America, and have a good evening.